Okay, step 4 of the name and explain is to look at literary devices. So we're going to start with personification. Personification is when an author assigns the qualities of a person to something that isn't human, or in some cases, to something that isn't even alive. And why would an author do that? It's extra work, right? So authors do that to describe something so that others can understand, because maybe the human qualities bring some extra meaning to whatever it is they're trying to describe, or they do it to emphasize a point. So we're going to see some personification in American Cheese by Jim Daniels. Okay, before we go back to the poem, I want to give you an example of personification. So here's a sentence. The rundown house appeared depressed. Now, a house cannot be depressed. A house doesn't have feelings, right? Here's the house. It looks depressed. It has a face, right? So the house is not depressed. The author's just using that word because we have certain associations that go along with the word depressed, and it's going to help us visualize the house a little bit better if if the author had just said the house was run down. So it gives us a better look. So we'd probably picture in our minds something like this house, right? Because we wouldn't assume that the house was some kind of freaky person house, right? So that's just one example of personification. Okay, the example of personification that I want us to look at closely in the poem is in the first sentence. It says, "At department parties, I eat cheeses my parents never heard of. Gooey, pale cheeses, speaking garbled tongues." Remember, we said gargle means to change the meaning or to change the sound. And I gotta tell you this, if your cheese is talking to you, um, you don't eat it, first of all, and second of all, you need to go to the doctor right away because you are hallucinating. Cheese doesn't speak, and it doesn't speak in garbled tongues. Garbled tongues probably means something like speaking foreign languages, because the whole poem is all about American cheese. And at the beginning of the poem, this gentleman or the speaker, is eating cheese that's different from what his parents eat, right? He didn't even eat Swiss cheese. So he's probably eating these fancy foreign cheeses, and that's what the personification is telling us. Instead of just saying straight out, hey, I like to eat fancy cheese from other countries, he's saying the cheese is gooey and pale and speaks garbled tongues. It's the personification there gives us the association of how it's not just from another country. The garbled makes it mean, there's something different about it. There's something mysterious about it. Garbled means hard to understand. So this cheese is quite different for him. Like the fanciness is so different from what he grew up with, and it tells us something about him as a person, that he's grown away from his background, from what his life was like when he was a kid. And so this personification really emphasizes that point, that in the poem, that even that he's different now from what he was when he was a kid. And so there's our personification, and that's a reason that the author might have put it in there, is to help us have that association. Okay, another thing we're going to look at in the poem is the idea of symbolism. A symbol is an object that stands for itself, and it also stands for something else. Why would an author put a symbol in a piece of literature? One reason is to add deeper meaning, and another reason is to emphasize an idea. And I'm going to say this, I'm just going to say it. Anytime an author's using a literary technique or a literary device, it's probably to emphasize an idea. Just throwing that out there. But definitely with symbolism, that's the case. So I want to show you examples of common symbols that you see in your life. This sign right here, you probably know means recycling. And this sign right here means peace. So those are examples of symbols in everyday life. And now we're going to look at a symbol in the poem. Okay, the symbol that I want to talk to you about in American Cheese, the poem, is actually cheese. So it seems like cheese represents for the speaker his life in a way. So his grown-up life is all about the fancy cheese from other places, right? He's acquired a taste for. He's changed, and now he likes that kind of cheese in addition to the American cheese. The American cheese represents to him his childhood and the family togetherness of his childhood. Even his house was shaped like American cheese, the house where he grew up with his family all together, very tight. And when he talks about the 64 singles wrapped in wax, how they're all together, and it's really hard to tear them apart, just like his family was hard to tear apart, just like they were like sparrows and starlings, they stick together, and the American cheese represents that for him. The love that his mother had for the family. She spent her time and energy making sandwiches using American cheese, and making food for someone is a way to show love for them. So that American cheese represents that love that he felt and that family togetherness that he felt growing up in a house that was shaped like American cheese. And then at the end, in that last stanza, he talks about coming home. The thing he wants more than anything is American cheese, because it reminds him of the love and togetherness that he felt like when he was a child. And you'll find as you go away from home and grow up and go to college and move away and all those things, there are certain things that just remind you of home and that represent home to you. And for this guy, for this speaker in this poem, American cheese is the symbol that represents his family and love and togetherness. Now, we've looked at 2 literary devices in this poem. There are many more in there. I'm looking right now and I see metaphors and similes. There are lots of other things in the poem, and you and your teacher should definitely feel free to explore those things together, and you would write your thinking in column 4 of the Name and Explain chart. That's where you would write it. So I'm going to write symbolism and American cheese equals love, right? For the narrator. And that's one thing that I can look at, and I can write about my personification right up here, and then I would put my explanation of what it represents. So that's going to be your task with your teacher and your class, to see what else you can find and what else you want to explore. And I encourage you to stick with what's obvious to you. We're not asking you to dissect this poem and look for every single tiny little thing that you can ever find. But if there's something that really stands out to you, that's what you should be writing about. And again, what stands out to you might be different than what stands out to somebody else, and that's okay. As long as you can support your thinking with something that's in the text, it's okay to write about it. All right, happy thinking.